might be the GT-R. If you had to pick just one, a Skyline to rule them all, the ultimate Godzilla. This is the 400R. And we're talking 7 figures, not yen, dollars or pounds.
But do you have to be a Skyline specialist to appreciate the 400R? Is it just the scarcity that makes it special, or is it truly an elevated driving experience? It's quite hard to tell, because the chance for anyone to get behind the wheel of one, let alone on a track, really doesn't come around very often. So, I'm going to make the absolute most of this opportunity. If this film dumps your valve and makes you think about swapping your Skyline for a Skyline, then why not head over to HagertyMarketplace.com. You can auction for free and keep 100% of the sale price. To find out more, just click on the lovely little link in the titivating description down below. The Skyline GT-R story started all the way back in the 1960s, but arguably it only really kicked off in the 1990s when it went four-wheel drive with the Godzilla generation. The R32 not only tapped into the JDM zeitgeist, but swept all before it in Group A racing. By comparison, the R33 that followed in 1995 wasn't as revered, and as we'll discover, it had a harder time when it went racing too. However, it did produce the legendary 400R. With a bigger, much more powerful engine, a 50% lighter carbon fibre prop shaft, wider tracks, Type D springs, bespoke Bilstein dampers, a titanium exhaust and myriad special body parts, it was no wonder it cost 3 times that of a normal GT-R when it was launched. Only 44 out of a planned 100 were ever built, making it second only to the R34 Z-Tune in rarity. But it's familiar to millions of people thanks to another huge phenomenon of the 90s, Gran Turismo on the Sony PlayStation.
The question is, does the reality live up to the pixels? When you first get into this, it is not obvious really where, well, all the value is, because it's still a sort of pretty cheap feeling interior in here, apart from obviously this lovely 3-spoke wheel.
Of course, it's not just the wheel. There is the strangely tall titanium gear knob, and some of the details, things you might initially miss, are parts that people go crazy for.
A set of these dials alone is worth quite a lot of money. And I love the fact this is still a 4-seater as well.
This particular LP2 or Midnight Purple car also has a couple of rather fun optional extras.
This fake kill switch has to be the coolest cigarette lighter I think I've ever seen, and yes, it is a genuine NISMO part, just like, ta-da! It should be a thing now, always check the glove box, like always check the case back. This is a genuine NISMO part, but more importantly than that, it has this sticker here, Club Le Mans. That was something that you could pay a membership to and help fund the GT1 program in 95-96 for Nissan. And it meant you could be entered into a lottery, so I think about 10 people were actually flown over to the race itself, but it also gave you access to these special parts like these glove box dials here. They're just so cool. They actually sort of double up some of the ones here, but why wouldn't you want them? Just brilliant.
The R33 went to Le Mans in 1995 with a sort of tortoise and hare 2-car effort, one running an X-Track sequential and Group A engine, while the other was in a more endurance-focused N1 spec. However, as you may have guessed, they were up against some fairly stiff competition, because 1995 was the year the McLaren F1s turned up. A 10th place finish meant it was best of the rest in the GT1 class, but it wasn't the result they'd hoped for, and it was even more outgunned in 96 when Porsche produced its 911 GT1. Nissan did make one LM road car for homologation purposes, but that was rear-wheel drive, only has 300 horsepower and still belongs to Nissan. The 400R was built as a celebration of the Le Mans efforts, and as such the bonnet is described as an LM bonnet and the 3-piece wheels are LM GT1 wheels. However, one often reported Le Mans connection isn't actually true, but we'll come back to that in a bit.
One little bit of information, the car that was meant to win Le Mans that year, so the one with the X-Track gearbox, was number 23. Why? because 2.3 is Nissan.
And what about the driving experience? Well, it certainly takes a lap or two to adjust to it.
Straight away, this is quite a heavy car really, 1550 kilos, despite various weight-saving things in it. But as soon as you tip into the first corner, it feels so agile, almost unnervingly so. It turns in and almost wants to oversteer straight away, and that's because of the super HICAS.
This is Nissan's rear-wheel steering system, the slightly strange acronym standing for High Capacity Actively Controlled Steering. The first iterations were passive, but by the Super era it was computer controlled, along with the four-wheel drive system and the active rear limited slip diff.
And what it does is it turns the rear wheels the opposite way to the fronts on the way into a corner, so it gives you real agility on turning. It feels spooky to start with, but then absolutely wonderful in fact when you get used to it. It does take the lock off the rear wheels to help stabilise it mid-corner, but by that point you pick up the throttle and the ATTESA ETS-Pro takes over, so you steer it on the throttle through the rest of the way through the corner. Although it's a big car, it disguises its weight. It really does. It feels so light on its feet, it dances around. Some people lock out the active rear steer on these. They don't like the feeling of it, but I love it.
In the dry, the 400R simply doesn't understeer. It is remarkable. It reminds me of later Mitsubishi Evos with the way it points into corners.
It was lowered 30mm, so yes, it is pretty tough, and I can imagine on the road, well, it could be pretty jumpy. You certainly feel the bumps around here. And this car is one that you really have to drive hard, drive up to the limit, and perhaps a little bit over it to understand it. Because although there is enjoyment to be had at lower speeds, you can feel that agility. It doesn't feel quite happy until it's on the limit and you're using it properly. That's when it really comes alive. Certainly in the dry, I did some laps in the dry as well, thankfully. It's so good. It's got so much grip. It's just almost spooky. To me, it's a bit like, and I'm no chef, but when you're whisking egg whites for meringues and you sort of think nothing's happening, and then you whisk a bit harder and suddenly it all comes alive. It becomes meringue, or in the case of the GT-R, it becomes everything you read about and probably saw on Best Motoring.
With enough commitment and speed, the car suddenly gels and the whole experience becomes smoother. The hyperactivity almost seems to melt away and the handling makes sense. It's a change akin to a set of slicks switching on. To that extent, the 400R is a car that you need to be comfortable with moving around. You simply can't drive it straight and get the most from it. Drive it slowly and you know you're missing out.
Turn into this corner here and just instantly feel it on the nose and then steer it on the throttle, pick up that apex there, up through the revs, down through this dip. It's constantly moving around when you're really driving it. And it feels so rear driven. Boy, is it quick as well.
We should probably take a moment to look under the bonnet at this point, because it's the 2.8 litre straight six running 1.1 bar of boost from its N1 turbo, where there's been some misinformation in the past.
I love being able to see the carbon underside to this bonnet, and that titanium strut brace is a thing of absolute beauty, and I want to hang it on a wall at home like a piece of artwork. Anyway, to the engine, the RBX GT2. Now, legend has it that, like the rest of the car, this was inspired by the Le Mans cars, which had 2.8 litre engines. However, this is actually from another race car, one that raced in the Japanese GT Championship. So the Tahira Limit team ran a car under Zexel Y's livery. That was the last GT-R, in fact, to run four-wheel drive in the JGTC. And the Reineck engine department built them a special engine, which was also 2.8 litres, but crucially, slightly different. So it was 2771cc, which is exactly the same as this. So this engine comes not from the Le Mans car, but, quite interesting, privateer team in the JGTC.
Credit to the owner of this car, Johan Bonnier, who has done huge amounts of research into the farthest reaches of Skyline history and unearthed this fact on his travels. Of course, in 1996, Japanese performance cars, including the regular R33 GT-R, were all meant to abide by the Japanese gentleman's agreement not to exceed 280 PS or 276 brake horsepower.
This has, well, 400 PS, and this one is definitely putting out all of those. It's been on a rolling road recently and it is very, very fit indeed.
Nissan, or rather NISMO, got around the agreement because this was a hand-built, limited edition, not mass-produced.
And it's an engine that you do really want to rev out, so it makes its peak power sort of just over 6,000 RPM, but it gets better, I think, when you do really rev it all the way out to sort of 7, 8, then it comes alive.
In some ways, driving this today, it is the chassis and its amazing agility that stands out. The power isn't exceptional by modern standards. Neither is the torque at 346 pounds-feet. And yet, the 400R also is about the power. It makes sense why a stock Skyline is rarer than Godzilla droppings, because the extra 120 brake horsepower above the gentleman's ceiling makes the chassis come alive.
This is the best GT-R I've driven out of any generation. I mean, I've got a soft spot for the R33 anyway, because it was sort of the first GT-R that I was really aware of. It might be a famous PlayStation car, but it's so involving to drive. It's got so much character. This is not digital at all.
And I can't help comparing it to the other car that we have in the pit lane, the very analogue Honda NSX-R.
What a two-car garage that would be. The purity of the NSX-R. And then the monstrous, characterful complication of this.